Welcome back. Today we are talking with Cary Jasgur, and we are talking about focusing on the correct areas of resiliency within your organizations. Cary, great first segment there. There were two areas that I wanted to quickly touch on. One is, it sounded at one point as though you were saying we should understand the business better.
In order to be successful at what we do, we need to understand the business inside out, upside down, backwards and forwards. Because not only our role is not merely to document, our role is to guide and to enhance. So by understanding the business, now, depending on the industry you work in, if you work in pharma, for example, do you need to understand the complexity of the manufacturing process? No. You do need to understand the key segments of manufacturing so that you can speak to what can we protect, what can we not protect, what can be done remotely, what cannot be done remotely. And then having that conversation with the business. So think of it as an enhanced personal BIA. So you're not asking your standard, what are your technologies you use? You're going into depth of how do you use them? How do you access them? What happens if you do not have access? Do you have an alternate access? So by getting to understand what the department or business unit or functional area does, it helps you paint that picture of how to write that plan, but it also helps you identify those inter-organizational dependencies. What
Hmm.
departments are dependent on one another? Something could happen two levels up that this one piece of information that you need to do that business unit needs to do their job doesn't come through. Have you accounted for that? And without knowing holistically how the business is designed and connected, it's near impossible to do. So we're in some cases writing our plans in a silo, which goes against everything that should be done. We should all play nice together as one big team.
And the other thing, you started to allude to it, and it's actually the next item that we should be focusing on, and that's supply chains.
So there's two ways to look at supply chain. So traditionally, supply chain was raw materials. Now, in an ever-changing world, supply chain can also include service provider, uh, third part, excuse me, third-party vendors that are doing work on your behalf, that you outsource
Mm.
things to. So it's more than just the raw material factor. So it's looking at that extended organization. So those other bits and pieces that help your organization deliver on what it goods and services it actually produces. So I think COVID really taught organizations that from a raw material standpoint, that having supply chain resilience is crucial. And you're seeing more and more job postings for supply chain resilience professionals
Mhm.
to work hand in hand with organizational resilience or operational resilience individuals, generally on the same team, but they have the specialty in supply chain, logistics, sourcing, that kind of thing that the average BC professional may not have. But
Yeah,
it's broadening that team and bringing in expertise on if we rely on goods and services, how do we ensure that we get them no matter what?
yeah, because things on the other side of the world are having impact, you right here, and sometimes you never think like, how is something way over there impacting me here? It
Well,
shouldn't.
yeah, we looked at, I mean, looking at COVID, for example, the number of container vessels coming from Asia to the US or to North America that were just sitting and doing donuts out there because they could
Mhm.
not come into port for contamination issues. They carry raw materials, sometimes finished product that is on the consumer market, and it makes things a little topsy-turvy when you cannot get a hold of them.
Right.
Uh, the second half of that is those service providers or third-party vendors that are performing a function on your behalf. So when I was a consultant, for example, I used to have a pharmaceutical company that all their clinical research organizations were in China. So they did all of their testing and lab work and things like that. They were not able to send product back. Everything, if it was not transmitted digitally, there was no way to get that information to take that drug or what have you to the next level of the manufacturing process.
Right. Or, as you mentioned, ship containers, ones that get stuck in this Suez Canal.
Yes.
And that actually leads us to the very next topic, polycrisis or simultaneous disruptions. More than more than one situation occurring at a time.
Yeah, I mentioned in my session that it's not when, it's if. It is going to happen. It has happened. No longer do we look at depending on where you're at in the country, I'm going to pull off the shelf, my winter storm plan. That's
Yeah.
no longer the case anymore. Your plan should be written with an all hazards approach, and be able to be dynamic in the way that they shift and change to address those emerging calamities. The one that probably is most notable is Superstorm Sandy. No one in New York thought a hurricane would hit them, much less massive flooding at the same time, power outages, business closures. So a lot of these compounding things that there were no plans to prepare for, because first of all, you have to get out of your mindset, it's not going to happen to me. That's really not true anymore. Hurricanes are not just at my house in Florida, they're everywhere. Uh, as we saw, devastating damage for the last several years. But preparing for and being agile enough to adjust on the fly. A lot of that comes with the training of your crisis management team, that they are forward thinking enough to be able to make those decisions rapidly. So we no longer have the decision by committee where everyone sits around in a room and raises their hand and say, yeah, I think this is what we should do next.
Mm.
By that time, something else has already happened. But we need to look at not only simultaneous disruptions, but compounding disruptions. So a second force that makes the first one much worse than the first one was.
It's kind of reminds me of getting rid of your assumptions. The only assumption that's going to be proven correct is that all your assumptions are wrong.
Yes,
You
and
know,
there's always that one fun thing. If anyone ever took geometry in the United States, you never assume because let's just break the letters into syllables.
yeah, it's okay. I remember the old Benny Hill skit where you circle the first three letters.
Yes, yes, that's exactly it.
Yeah. I just dated myself on that, didn't I? Even knowing that reference. So the next one to focus on and look at is exercising and testing.
We've all heard the importance of exercising and testing. You can exercise and test, exercise and test, and exercise and test. The true test of your plan is to actually use it. A lot of organizations are reluctant to do a live or functional test or exercise. So we can only get as close as a simulation. We can create elaborate scenarios in our brains to step through all of these. But this is another nice little thing that I did not originate it, but it is very, very true, is never let a good disaster go to waste.
Hmm.
That is the true test of whether or not your policies, procedures, plans are up to the test, literally. Um, it is beneficial if you use third-party vendors to be involved in their testing as well, so that you have a confidence level that they're actually prepared to do what they need to do so you can continue what you need to do.
Yeah, we used them once in a previous test, a third party vendor back in the days when people would keep tapes and things like that off site. We our test started by notification, and that part of that notification was contacting the vendor to see if how long it would take for them to send us the materials we need, which included all our off quote unquote offsite copies of DR plans and business continuity plans to see how long it would actually really take. So we weren't just testing us, we were testing the processes, testing our vendors and everything. So you really do have to think, beyond, okay, let's just start rebuilding Exchange, so to speak, or email.
It is more than organization centric. You need to, so depending on the plan you're testing. So a really good example is you're testing your emergency management plan. Get local law enforcement, first responders,
Hmm.
the mayor's office, get them all involved in your exercise, because you're going to be relying on them to play their role. It's something they do day in and day out. But if you've never had that interaction with them, you may not know who to call, what to expect. So getting them involved is going to be extremely useful. And
Yeah.
9 times out of 10, depending on where you live, those services are more than happy to participate. It may take a little bit of wiggling to get it, on a calendar properly, but they're generally very willing because they want to be assured that you're not going to go crazy when they show up.
Yeah. And actually, we found that out during one of these tests. Same company, one of the same kind of tests, and we did have uh, the fire department involved. And our crisis management team, there were people on there that were supposed to be the point of contact for the fire marshal when he showed up. But when the fire marshal showed up, he already had a relationship and understanding with the facilities manager, who wasn't on the crisis management team, or at least didn't have this one particular role. And we discovered a gap because all the questions he was asking, the fire marshal, couldn't be answered by the person on the crisis management team because all that knowledge was with the facility person who was standing there going, "Why are you not talking to me?"
And that you bring up a really good point. So when you're building your plans and when you're testing them, do you have the right people on the right teams?
Hmm.
Um, Not always should the crisis management team be made up of senior leadership. They're not in direct connection with daily operation. So make sure that you've got the correct people if sub teams need to be created so that you have the people with the knowledge speaking to the people asking the question.
Yeah, yeah, like we found out the hard way. But it was a good way to, I'd rather find that out under a test than find out in a
Yes.
situation. So it turned out to be good in the end. And we did a rejuggling of people and some roles to make it fit what we learned. So that was good.
And there
And
there are there are
okay,
some resources from an exercise standpoint that if people have access to them. So the US federal government takes tests and exercises very, very seriously. And there is a series of scenarios and playbooks that have been created by the Department of Homeland Security uh, that can assist organizations in creating different type of exercise scenarios, chemical waste, bomb threats, all of those to get a more realistic feel and a more dynamic and changing rather than something that's scripted.
yeah, I tell every time I go through some of these, uh, the leadership or the sponsor, we don't want to push people, we don't want to scare them. I'm going, but in a real situation, that's exactly how they're going to feel.
The
So
human condition takes over.
yeah, so why don't we do that under a controlled circumstance where at least they know it's a test, rather than try and figure that out when they could find out, whatever the situation is, that a colleague has gone missing, or you know injured terribly. They could see something that traumatizes them. Test them, push them. Let's, I'm not saying make them cry in a corner, but test them under different situations.
Well, that also not only you have to factor in the human condition, that's just human nature is the flight or fight response,
Hmm.
but it also will help you validate that you have the appropriate people in the appropriate role.
Right.
If you have someone that's going to freak out every single time, maybe they're not the best person to be there.
Yeah. Yeah, I've encountered that too with people who come in, they don't get involved with anything, but they thought they were in charge and would cause more issues. It's like, you're the wrong person, go away. So that moves us into kind of logically the next one, training and awareness.
So as we mentioned for exercises, if do not expect that your various teams know what they're supposed to do at time of disruption. So an easy one, the IT mentality is generally pretty easy. Server broken, must fix server. So pretty cut and try there. But the on the business side, they may not necessarily know what it is they're supposed to do. I mean, it's laid out in their plan, but if it's not written the way they understand it or logically or useful for them, they're going to throw that out the window and just do what comes natural, which may or may not be a good idea. So training the individuals on how to respond. So what I've done for a lot of clients when I was a consultant is prior to an exercise, we would train them on the various aspects of the plan that we were going to be exercising and basically think of it like an audition for the exercise is let's walk through, what your roles and responsibilities are as you understand them. And then let's check the plan and see if you're right. And if you are, great, we're good to go. If you're not, then we need to rethink or we need to redocument or readdress how we are going to approach this because you're not properly trained in how to respond.
Mhm.
We do not want, you know, Joe Smith in the IT department talking to the media, although that may be a first response is, if they see them out there, outside the data center with a fire hose or something, someone's going to ask a question. So it's really emphasizing what their roles and responsibilities are at time of disruption, not business as usual, because
Mhm.
we're shifting 180 degrees out of phase.
And I think that's what happens a lot with training and exercises is we use so many of these different scenarios that really what we're doing is we're responding to something that's been dreamt about and and made up and you know uh,
Uh,
full of assumptions and biases and things like that. Not hey, the alarms are really going off. There's real smoke here. You can hear people screaming. That kind of feeling.
And that making your exercises more realistic helps with training. So you're right. Someone thought up that scenario and wrote it in such a way that it travels down a logical path. Well, using different tools to kind of shake up that scenario can help you in training is, you know, going along, as I mentioned, as far as Homeland Security uses a lot of injects. So they have prepared injects that depending on how the conversation is going, they'll throw something in. So it's essentially throwing the wrench into the works and seeing how you respond, which can also drive future training uh, options, as well as maybe a restructuring of planning documents, making them, not so precise, a little bit more vague, a little bit more flexible. Because none of us want to pick up that brick and open it up and try and read it step by step of what we're supposed to do. We want it to be as inherent and natural as possible.
Right. On that note, that we're going to end our second segment. Today we are talking with Cary Jasgur, and we're talking about, are you focusing on the proper areas of resiliency for your organization? And we will be right back. If you liked that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave me a message and let me know your thoughts. Of course, don't forget to subscribe. And in the meantime, stay prepared, everybody.